Welcome back. This is episode four. We're talking about the fact that God's universal laws is what brings a society success. And when societies turn from those laws, they go into darkness. How in the world could a Christian nation like Canada have gotten so turned around? Let's have a look at this, okay? And stay with me, okay? This is difficult stuff, but I'll tell you what. This may be a little difficult going, and the last session may have been a lot for you to take in. But tell you what, you go in and you study it carefully, and you'll find that there's no way around it. Truth is truth. What did Jesus say? And you shall know the truth, and truth shall set you free. Freedom comes from truth. So let's go on with this. In our last episode, we talked about the fact that God designed civilization to function according to his laws, of which the Ten Commandments are the summary, and the Golden Rule is the basic principle or governing dynamic. We must not forget that God's law came first, and now science has confirmed it. Throughout history, we had to accept God's law by faith, and now by science, we have come to understand the nature of design. So then by faith, we discovered, and by science, we confirm. Science and revelation are talking about the same things. Science is the study of the natural, and revelation, the supernatural. My old university professor, Wayne Haston, gave me this. We're all, whether we're Christian or non-Christian, we're all looking at the same universe. Matter of fact, we live in the same world and the same universe, but we're seeing it from different perspectives. On this picture here, this slide, on the left-hand side is the biblist viewpoint. Notice up at the top, there's God and the Bible, and there's a set of glasses on looking through the world. The biblicist, which is what I am, looks at reality through science and revelation. The secularist, on the right side, looks at reality only through science and ignores revelation. Well, God intended for us to know both of them. You see, we see the natural with our natural senses, and we see the supernatural. We don't have the senses to see that. It has to be revealed. And the revelation, that's why the Bible is called Revelation. The problem is there's been, over the years, it's like science and versus the Bible. There's antagonism between the two, which is ridiculous. There's no need for a war between science and the Bible. The adversarial, rather than the cooperative approach, is the root of our problem. Okay? It is absurd to expect theology to do what only science can do, and expect science to do what only theology can do. Science is the study of the creation, and theology is the study of the Creator. I quoted this earlier, Jastrow. At this moment, it may seem as though science will never be able to raise the curtain on the mystery of creation. For the scientist who lives by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. Actually, modern science was born out of Christian ideology. Both Alfred North Whitehead and Robert Oppenheimer have stressed that modern science was born out of the Christian worldview. Whitehead said that Christianity is the mother of science because of the medieval insistence on the rationality of God. Because the early scientists believed that the world was created by a reasonable God, they were not surprised to discover that people could find out something true about nature and the universe on the basis of reasoning. The Greeks, the Muslims, and the Chinese eventually lost interest in science. The Chinese had an early and profound knowledge of the world. Joseph Needham, in his book The Grand Titration, 1969, explained why this has never developed into a full-fledged science. There was no confidence, quote, that the code of nature's law could ever be unveiled and read because there was no assurance that a divine being, even more rational than ourselves, had ever formulated such a code capable of being read. That's a mouthful, but it's true. Obviously, theology had to have a head start. The Bible wasn't meant to be a science textbook. It was meant to lead human beings into fellowship with the Creator. God revealed his plans, called revelation, to the first men and expected them to pass them on from generation to generation. Part proof of this is the presence of the divine law woven throughout human history, as we've tried to show. If men had obeyed God's law from the beginning of history, we may have discovered modern science long before what's called the Age of Enlightenment. In history, the Age of Reason, or the Age of Enlightenment, was a reaction against the so-called Christian church. What had happened is the so-called Christian church, mostly the people that had departed from the Bible but were still religious, the Christian church had become dogmatic and unreasonable. And an intellectual revolution in Europe, unfortunately, forced people to choose between faith and reason. Now, if you were offered only two choices, so this is the old the walnut game, the oldest game in the world, faith and religion or reason and science, which one would you choose? Folks, unfortunately, if you choose, you lose. You got to have both. You got to have faith and you got to have reason. Why choose between faith and reason? God gave you both faculties and expects you to use them. Now, why does faith and reason have to work together? What is so little understood and rarely taught is that faith is the first ingredient needed to learn anything. My goodness, you had to have faith. When your teacher told you to learn the alphabet, you said, when do I need to learn the alphabet? If you hadn't learned the alphabet, you'd never learn to read, and you couldn't even learn to think, or you couldn't write. You needed faith in what your teacher told you to learn. You need faith to learn anything. For instance, the Greek philosopher Pythagoras proposed the earth was round, and Galileo proved it. But the scientific world had to exercise faith for over 1,000 years to confirm it. In essence, they had to suspend their disbelief until they were convinced by facts and understood the reasons why the facts fit the proposed theory. Although in the 18th and 19th centuries science was transforming the world with incredible new discoveries and amazing technological advances, most scientists back then still believed the universe had to have a designer. It's only in recent years that the idea that there was no designer has become the pet philosophy amongst philosophers. The same designer expected people to believe his word, the Bible, about the supernatural realm. God, in essence, was saying, I can't show it to you yet, but trust me, it's just as great and better than the natural universe. He's talking about the supernatural universe is better even than the natural universe. But you have to trust God about it. The problem was, people were being forced to choose between science and revelation, between faith and reason, and they weren't being told that both are absolutely necessary for understanding the universe. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, science was just beginning to study and understand the natural world. It is only in the 20th century that we've had the technology to discover the design characteristics, both micro and macro, which have led us to understand, or led us to, the anthropic principle, which I mentioned earlier, and is probably one of the most important topics in this whole True North session. The fledgling scientific knowledge in the 18th century permitted men like Charles Darwin and Friedrich Nietzsche to propose theories that have since been overturned by further scientific investigation. Tell you what, it's impossible for me to go into the kind of depth necessary for this subject. For instance, Darwin's theory of evolution and Nietzsche's nihilism. You need to go elsewhere. So I'm posting on the site some places to go a little further. My purpose is to lead people to understand how the philosophies developed before Confederation and how these have turned the Christian nation 180 degrees in the wrong direction. I'm doing the best I can, so help me out here. The situation at Confederation. It seems that the Christians at Confederation couldn't understand science, and scientists couldn't understand the Bible. So gradually, Christians couldn't defend their faith in the face of the revolution in science and technology. The result, there were fewer and fewer genuine believers and more unbelievers. The unbelievers in the past became believers by faith in God's revelation, but new scientific theories seemed to disagree with biblical revelation. Although Canada had started out with Christian roots, something was happening in the wider sphere of world philosophy. There was a big shift, especially around the time Canada became a nation in 1867. In 1867, Matthew Arnold published his poem Dover Beach, predicting the end of the Christian era. This was the beginning of the big shift from faith to reason. What happened next ended the era of, I guess you could call it, when Christianity was king. I can't read the whole poem right now, Dover Beach. You need to go onto the slides and read it for yourself. But basically what he was saying, and let me quote just a bit of it. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand glimmering and vast out in the night in the tranquil bay. Come to the window, sweet is the night air. The poet's taken the point of view of looking at the white cliffs of Dover, and he's making a metaphor of it. Let me go on to the next part. The sea of faith, he says, was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain, and we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. The poet, using metaphorical language, was talking about the retreat of Christianity from the Christian Western world. Now, three major factors began to impact our Christian roots at that time in history. I'll go over them really quickly. Number one, Christendom. Number two, the origin of species. Number three, the Humanist Manifesto. Taking Christendom. Now, Christendom in 1867, frankly, was pathetic, apathetic, and unsympathetic. They didn't seem to be able to understand the world around them anymore. And Christendom was full of three kinds: believers, unbelievers, and make-believers. Let me try to explain that to you. What does believers, unbelievers, make-believers mean? What is not general knowledge in Canada is that Christianity is not a club you join. You don't become a Christian by wanting to become a Christian. You don't become a Christian by living in a Christian nation or by joining a Christian church. You don't become a Christian by living by the Ten Commandments. There is a process by which you become a believer, which we'll talk about in the last session. And unfortunately, by the end of the 19th century, people had forgotten this process. So there were fewer and fewer believers and more unbelievers and make-believers. What do I mean by unbelievers and make-believers? Surprisingly, because Christianity had become the foundational belief system of the Western world, the Christian church became complacent, dogmatic, undisciplined, and irrelevant. That's one of the problems about being popular. Many people forgot that the Bible was the designer's operations manual, and God intended the Bible to be read and understood by faith, but frankly, people went to church, they got boring sermons, and that didn't make a lot of sense to them. I hate to say it's still that way now, as a matter of fact. The next generation of Christians found the Bible hard to believe, especially in the light of science. There were miracles, angels, demons, and an afterlife which many felt had to be scientifically proven before they could believe. Now, how do you scientifically prove demons or an afterlife? It's scientifically impossible. The only reason we even know it's true is because it's revealed by God in the Bible. What was forgotten is that the supernatural world is undiscoverable by science. It can only be discovered by revelation. Now, this was a time when Christendom was still highly visible, but increasingly unacceptable. The church was still an influence, but science was winning converts. There were still folks who wanted to become Christian because of personal needs or because it was still socially acceptable and commercially profitable to be thought of as a Christian, but they didn't know how, or they were confused by the competitive claims of modern science. So many people joined or stayed in churches out of a sense of duty. Many felt they could pretend to be a Christian and nobody would know the difference. So Christendom began to fill up with people who weren't even Christians. They were only make-believers. The historian Will Durant explained the situation best. He wrote the 11-volume set of The History of Civilization, so he knows what he's talking about. At the end of his life, he was not a Christian throughout his life, but at the end of his life, he realized his mistake. Here's what he said. I survived morally because I retained the moral code that was taught me along with the religion, while I discarded the religion. But you and I, and he's talking about his son, are living on a shadow. But what will happen to our children? We are living on the shadow of a shadow. He was saying that while he spent his life writing the history of civilization, he abandoned the Christian church of his fathers, and it was the religion of his fathers which had given him the moral code so necessary to the building of a Christian civilization. Durant realized at the end of his life that Christian morality without roots in the Bible is only a shadow, and that his having passed on his morality without its religious roots meant that his children and grandchildren inherited the shadow of a shadow. The Christian church failed to teach properly. It spent most of its time telling people what to do and what to believe. It's called dogmatism, but never bringing people to understanding why or how, what they should believe. Rules and regulations are a good start for children, but as children grow up, they need to be brought to full understanding. In Corinthians it says, what is it then? I will pray with the Spirit, and I will pray with the understanding also. I will sing with the Spirit, and I will sing with the understanding also. God wants us to know things, but he wants us to understand things too. Now, the second factor was the origin of species. I don't need to talk much about this. Darwin's book rocked the foundation of the whole world, and I think what drove the stake into the heart of Christendom. Because what happened, his book was taken as serious science and has since worked its way into the entire system. Almost everyone that I'm talking to right now believes that Darwin was correct. Well, what can I do in one session? I can tell you, maybe you need to reconsider. Start thinking about it. Okay? Here's some interesting comments about the 150th anniversary edition of Charles Darwin, Origin of Species. Quote, according to a recent survey, more than a third of professors at the top 50 universities describe themselves as atheist or agnostic. Among biology professors, it's a whopping 61%. It's no surprise, then, that the belief in atheism has doubled in the college age bracket in the last 20 years. Best-selling author Ray Comfort said, keeping intelligent design out of schools is a hill to die on for evolutionists. So when I found that Charles Darwin's Origin of Species was available to the general domain, and I had an idea that would get the truth onto college campuses. We are therefore reproducing the Origin of Species in a abridged form with an added special introduction. Now, the third factor, the Origin of Species became the manual for the scientific world, which might have been okay if it was only in the scientific world, but what really did a lot of harm was what's called the Humanist Manifesto. And I know Christian people, professors that know about the Humanist Manifesto. You guys, you need to check up on this. In 1933, a committee of 34 scholars, including 8 Unitarians, which are Christians who didn't believe in the Trinity, and how you can be a Christian and not believe in the Trinity is beyond me. These Unitarians and a great number of philosophy and history of religion professors signed this manifesto. Okay, its 15 tenets basically overturned the major teachings of the Bible. This is all history. You can check it out on Google. The first tenet was, quote, religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. Think that one through. These are Christians denying God's word. The translation of that, God did not create the universe. The fifth tenet was, humanism asserts that the nature of the universe depicted by modern science makes unacceptable any supernatural or cosmic guarantees of human values. What does that mean? God's laws and plans are null and void. You wonder why Canada has turned 180 degrees from its root? Amongst the signers of the Humanist Manifesto was John Dewey, after which we named the Dewey Decimal System. He's also the father of American public school system. That's who's running our school system. The American and the Canadian school system are being run by secular humanists under secular humanist philosophy. And it's been two generations of it. Now, suddenly the law of God has become mythology. That's what they teach in school. The Lord's Prayer and the Ten Commandments, while they remained entrenched in the public school system in the U.S. and Canada, the curriculum became the secular humanist agenda. When the first generation was fully indoctrinated, the old Christian traditions were dropped entirely. For instance, now you can't sing Christmas carols at school. You can't repeat the Lord's Prayer or the Ten Commandments. That's all been ripped away. The fourth tenet of the Humanist Manifesto said this: Humanism recognizes that man's religious nature and civilization, as clearly depicted by anthropology and history, are the product of a gradual development due to his interaction with his natural environment and with his social heritage. The individual born into that particular culture is largely molded by that culture. I can't go into any details. The slides will be in the supplement at the end of this session. Let me see if I can summarize this. The whole idea behind this is the secular humanists developed the idea of moral relativism. Moral relativism is the killer doctrine of secular humanism, and it has confused our society's moral compass. In the slide at the end, you can go to the links and go to the details. If you're concerned about what's going on in the public school system, you need to get on board with those slides. Our system, the Judeo-Christian ideology, was inherited and in place at Confederation. It's now had 150 years of contrary influence, including the teaching of Darwinism and secular humanism, to 2 generations of young people. As a result, we've turned 180 degrees away from our Christian roots. So what can we do now? And what will happen if we do nothing? In the next session, we'll talk about what will happen if we don't turn around. Please join us for the next session of True North. Thank you.